For those of you who are into numbers and into hard science, this chapter will be your cup of tea. It has a lot more mathematics, a lot more statistics than what's normal. So for those of you who are not into number crunching, you'll find it a little bit difficult. We'll go through the difficult parts briefly just to know so you know how it's done. But it won't be necessary to master the math that goes into the system that's used by James Rest. Can somebody tell me what DIT stands for? For those of you who want to know what the test is like a little bit, there's a first section with pure information question like what does DIT stand for? Defining Issues Test. These are the kinds of things you should memorize. It's very important not to think you can pass a test, at least not in my class, through rote memorization. But it is important to memorize. I think I've drawn this on the board before, but just so you remember, a French philosopher and thinker in the area of defining issues test. In the area of pedagogy, of education, by the name of Michel de Montaigne, coined the term the funnel system of education, if you remember. When I put X into the funnel and the funnel goes into your head, what comes out of your mouth? X. Obviously, I do not support this funnel approach. Much later, a Brazilian thinker who's considered to be one of the fathers of Catholic social theory, his name is Paulo Freire, he introduced a system called, or a concept called the banking system. The teacher deposits information in your brain, and then he makes withdrawals during tests. I don't use this system, obviously. It's quite the contrary. I expect you to work with the information. But it is important to memorize key terms, because when you want to be critical and you want to consider or reject ideas or options, you need to know them, which means some memorization is necessary. That should not be a problem for engineers or finance students. So some of the rest of you might have a problem. I don't use the funnel system, but memorization is important. Okay. So, the funnel system or the banking system. The idea that all I'm doing is dumping information in your head and withdrawing it later as if it was from a banking account, a savings account. So I do not use the banking system or funnel system, but please do memorize the important terms. So DIT, defining issues test. We'll be going into the distinction between Rest's approach and Kohlberg's approach in a moment, but who can give me a brief explanation of the example we used in class of Kohlberg's approach to studying ethics empirically? Empirical study of ethics. What is it? How do you study ethics empirically? What can you study empirically about ethics? What is ethics usually known? Okay, what is ethics usually known to do? To tell you what? What is right and what is wrong? What is moral? What is immoral? What is godlike? What is a sin? Etc. Etc. That's not empirical. That's no. Normative. Bravo. Now, what can we study empirically in the area of ethics? You said it. No. What can we study empirically? How people behave. So empirical studies of ethics are not about what's right or wrong, but how people act and what they base their decisions on. So Kohlberg's major achievement was to introduce or to, I would say, to establish in the community of scholars the idea that we have to approach ethics not only normatively, which every religion would teach us to do, but also secular ethics, for example, Greek, classical, or Hellenistic ethics, which is not based on religion. Hellenistic ethics and Hellenistic religion are very different. Religion during the period of the Greeks ancient Greeks and ancient Romans was about power. It wasn't about ethics. Ethics was secular. And what does secular mean? Not sacred. Excuse me, not sacred. Okay. So, what Kohlberg has done is he's expanded his approach to the empirical, studying how people determine and why people determine to an extent what's right or wrong. And what is this famous example that we used in class? The Heinz dilemma. Of course, Heinz dilemma. Okay, good. So, what is the major criticism? We've spoken about this before, and we started discussing it last class. What is the major criticism in general of Kohlberg's approach? The staircase. You can't go back. There's no backsliding. Bravo, very important. Two things. You can't go backwards, and you can't be moral and immoral at the same time. Now, empirically, what we've discovered is that's not actually the case. People do backslide all the time, and people do have selective ethics. They're moral in some areas and immoral in others. So the criticism of Kohlberg's approach was relatively easy to carry out because he argued his case empirically. So if you can find examples of people backsliding or examples of people being immoral and moral at the same time, he has been proven to be wrong. By the way, can we ever verify anything? Can you verify something? No. Why? What does verify mean? To be 100% true, it has to be right at all times, everywhere, and with everybody. There's no way to test that. But we can falsify. Because all we have to do is find one example of Kohlberg being wrong, and he's wrong. But he has to prove himself right all the time. So how do we verify things? By trying to prove them wrong? Right. How do we verify things? We verify things by testing them and trying to prove them wrong again and again. And if we're slightly deviating, varying the situation, we never prove it wrong. We can assume until further notice it's right. The theory of gravity, I've done the test before, I'll do it again. You know the old theory. There's no such thing as gravity. The world sucks. Wrong again. Okay. That's the old hippie joke, right? Okay, it's wrong again. So I think we've verified the existence of gravity. We have attempted to verify Kohlberg's theory by proving it wrong, and we have successfully proven it wrong. So once we realize that there is backsliding and there is selective application of morals using the empirical approach, we have to move forward. So normally when you take a theory and you develop it further beyond the actual origin, we talk about Kohlberg, Ian, and post or neo. What's the difference? The article is called neo-Kohlbergian. What does post mean? Going beyond, actually rejecting it, going beyond it. So neo-Kohlbergian uses a lot of what Kohlberg established, but tries to develop it further. Okay, James Rest is most famous for this, but he's by no means not the only one. But we'll be concentrating on him for the purpose of focus and brevity, not to get too complex. Okay, let's take out your readers to page 40. If you look at the handwriting at the bottom of the page, page 40. In the actual photocopied text, it would be page 70. And you see that what Rest has done is, instead of having stages, he has schemas. So, it's very straightforward. Let's have a look at table 4.1 in your reader. Oh, have you all turned to it? Okay. The biggest distinction is what is under the issue of consolidation transition types, hard stage model staircase. And the Neo-Kohlbergian is a soft model. The highest moral reasoning is principled reasoning, and in Neo-Kohlbergian it's post-conventional. It's very important for this region because basically Kohlberg cannot explain why people are ethical in the Middle East. Now, Rest did not study the Middle East, but he did study Eastern Europe. What do you have to do to be post-conventional according to Kohlberg? What did Dag Hammarskjöld have to do in order to move on to the post-conventional level? He had to move through the conventional, bravo. And if we look at Hammarskjöld's life, he had a very good conventional, in the sense of ethically conventional life before he moved into the global or international level. And so he was trained, he was socialized in good Swedish conventional ethics and then developed from there. And that would then allow us to agree that in the case of Hammarskjöld, he went from pre-conventional, I assume we didn't study his childhood, but pre-conventional to conventional, and he moved on to post-conventional while he was still in Sweden, and he developed either the fifth or sixth stage of post-conventional ethics according to Kohlberg. So that case would basically prove Kohlberg right. But there are many examples of this not being the case. What about somebody like, do you know of any Lebanese who are famous with respect to the UN? Thank you. Nancy Ashram? Yes, why?
She is the
UN ambassador for kids. Okay, well, that's not who I was asking, trying to get. Charles Malik. Charles Malik is famous for what? For the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, you can't get any more universal than the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Charles Malik, did he grow up in a country that was primarily based on rule of law or on culture of impunity? Culture of impunity. So how come he ends up being so post-conventional? Can Kohlberg explain that? Think about it, guys. Think about it. If Kohlberg assumes you have to go through a conventional ethical environment where, as a rule, you're punished if you do something wrong, and as a rule, you're rewarded if you do something right, how do we explain Charles Malik? You can't. That's the whole point. You can't. So what we now know is that his theory has significant weaknesses. The work done by Rest is focusing on Eastern Europe, but what he shows is that if we look at the three schemas, what are the three schemas? Let's go, where are they listed? Okay, on page 74. On page 74 or 42 with my handwritten numbering. Personal interest. Is personal interest in itself an ethical category, according to Rest? You all read this, right? So, is it an ethical category? No. No, it's not. Only looking out for your own interest in nobody's book would be ethical. I'm not aware of, and I don't think anybody could find an example of ethics that focuses on everybody acting according to their own interests. Normally, you have to go beyond that. So, if personal interest is the unethical behavior, we have two forms of ethical behavior, which are maintaining norms and post-conventional. We're familiar with post-conventional from the Kohlbergian. Maintaining norms. If you go back to the reading on where we were first introduced to Kohlberg, what's the problem with maintaining norms? Being obedient to existing rules. What's the problem? Why can that be a behavior which would cause you to be evil, do evil things, even against your will. It depends on the situation, or more importantly, it depends on the norms. If you're living in Nazi Germany, by the way, you found something on your desk. This is a small plug for the Human Rights Club, but it fits in well with our class today. In 1 year, about this time, it was actually in April, the genocide against the Armenians began. And that's particularly important in the last couple of days because we have something similar happening at this moment in Syria. So, this kind of behavior, let's say you're a member of the Syrian opposition and you're asked to go into a town and drive out all the civilian population, and those who don't flee, you kill them. Let's say you didn't actually think that's what you signed up to do. But now you have orders. And your approach to ethics is maintaining norms. What are you going to do? You're going to do it. That's the orders. What are soldiers supposed to do? Follow orders. What happens when soldiers don't follow orders? They normally in non-war situations are dishonorably discharged. In war situations, they are arrested, court-martialed, and if they cause significant damage to the war effort, they're executed. And sometimes in battle situations, they're executed on the spot. The military police, the purpose of the military police is to basically, when soldiers turn and run, you shoot your own soldiers. Okay, so maintaining norms has this unique weakness that you might be maintaining norms which are wrong. What is a good example? Or give me one of the four four dilemmas, the paradigms. Which one is truth versus loyalty? Loyalty to norms versus my personal desire to tell the truth, to do good. So, what happens if you don't grow up in a world in which you have norms which you find to be right? I do this test I don't know if I've done it with you yet. I think I did it at the beginning of the semester. In your life, think about it. What was the first time in your life that you became aware of rules about right or wrong? In which context? In which situation?
In school.
Before that? Not before that? At home. At home. Normally, people learn at an early age from their parents and their family. In Lebanon, we usually have larger families with aunts and uncles and grandparents. You learn from your family about right and wrong. The second one is the school. But there's a third one before you go to school. Often you're introduced to it before school. Religion. So normally it's family, religion, school. Where's the first time that you actually learned that if you break the rules, nothing's going to happen to you?
School.
School, thank you. School is sort of this is why I have this here, education, right? Where else do you learn that breaking the rules is okay, crime pays? That's the same thing as school, okay? Where else? Usually not the family, sometimes. In which institutional setting? Work. Okay, employment.
It's not convincing.
What's not convincing?
How we break the rules in school and we are not funny.
Doesn't happen at NDU. Nobody gets into the university without knowing English properly. Do your professors always speak English with you? No, there you go. Okay, so when a professor doesn't lecture in English, according to the university bylaws, he will be warned, he'll be fired. Does that happen? No, it's not happening. Your parents are paying a lot of money for you to learn English so that you can take your English education and go apply it anywhere in the world. What your professors are teaching you is sort of a mix of English, Arabic, and French. Now, which country besides Lebanon can you speak that in? No, but basically they're locking you into the Lebanese market, right? So, you should be literary in English. You should be literary in Arabic. And you should be literary in French. Or literate. There's literate, and there's lingual. Parentheses. This is not, we're going off on a tangent here. Okay. What is the difference between lingual and literate? Is anybody studying education in this class? Lingual means, according to educators, lingual means that I can comfortably navigate. I can fit in. You don't have to speak great French to be lingual. You don't have to speak great Arabic to be lingual. Lingual, like bilingual, trilingual. Literate means that you know everything you do know, you know in a language. People who are monolingual are definitely literate in one language, because that's the only language they have. When you're bilingual, it does not mean that you're biliterate. You can be trilingual and not triliterate. Or you can be tri-illiterate. I actually have a Facebook group called Tri-Illiteracy. I'm not talking about any specific country, but I've known people to not be able to speak any language completely. Why do people slip out of English into French or out of Arabic into English? Because they can't say it. They can't say everything they need to say in French or English or Arabic. So they're actually illiterate in 3 languages. Okay. You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so the point being, why are people in Russia or Poland or Ukraine post-conventional? Why was Charles Malik post-conventional? We can't explain it using Kohlberg's method. We can explain it using Rest's method. Rest does not assume that you have to go through conventional. Well, he wouldn't even use the term conventional. He's dropped that concept. He's basically saying and studying empirically people's behavior and saying we have 3 possibilities here. We have people who maintain norms. Is anybody studying psychology here? Any psychology students? Okay. What's the difference between an oral and an anal character? I just took one class. Does anybody who's not a psychology student know? Yes.
Anal is a pain in the ass.
And oral? Oral is forever young, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Okay. And that's probably a way you can remember it, but that would not be what I'd like to see on the test, right?
Actually, I got that idea.
Okay, but can someone explain it in a less graphic way?
That wasn't graphic.
I said less graphic. Less graphic. Oral means that you are pulling things, you're very into enjoying things, you see the big picture, you're outgoing, whereas anal is tight, strict to the rules. Engineers tend to not like to be hugged because they are anal. Okay, so it's not true. Okay, but if you're anally challenged, can you say that? If you're anally challenged, take tango lessons. Okay, that's the last plug. That's the last plug. Tango lessons every Wednesday at 12 in the musicology department in the basement. Okay, I'll stop. Yes, okay, good. Ask your friends. Who took tango lessons with me? Look at those guys. Hey, see? You never expected that, did you? Okay, so maintaining norms basically means that I obey the rules no matter what. We're going to be seeing with Philip Zimbardo in his Stanford experiment, where he has half of the students being guards and half of the students being prisoners. There were very few, there was about 8 and 8, but there were 2 or 3 people who did not go along. And the most amazing example was a prisoner, because they were chosen randomly, whether they're prisoners or not. And what Zimbardo, it's the next chapter, what Zimbardo found out is that not only did the guards become very vicious and very much enjoying themselves and torturing other people type of guards, but the prisoners fit in very quickly into their role and allowed this to happen to them. And there was one exception. There were a few exceptions, but there was one who was absolutely adamant. He would not do things that he thought were immoral. His name was Sarge. They gave him the nickname Sarge. And he was very, very religious, very conservative, and very anal, and very much into maintaining norms. So he would do whatever they told him until they started doing the Abu Ghraib thing on him and doing some sort of sexually perverse things with the prisoners. And he refused. And he said, I'm a Christian. I won't do that. And they tortured him. And they couldn't break him. So he was very much into maintaining norms. The advantage of that is, of course, that if the norms are right, and you could say, for example, that certain people who are very religious, they might be, as somebody so graphically said, a pain in the ass, but they will not do things that are wrong. If they are in the army and they're asked, for example, to torture people or to practice ethnic cleansing, driving the people out of Kassab, for example, someone might say, no. And that did happen. And even in Nazi Germany, there were people, and the people who refused were mainly very devout Christians. Actually, the first successful, long-term underground movement after Hitler came to power was in the German universities, and it was organized by Catholic students. The Name of the Rose is a film about this very case. We've shown it several times here at NDU. So religion does offer you that advantage. But the big disadvantage is that the rules might be wrong. Now, you have three options here. One is self-interest. That's obvious. Everyone does that. Second is maintaining norms. This is something you're trained to do. The third is post-conventional. Post-conventional means I aspire to something higher than myself and higher than the context in which I live and work. How do people get this kind of thinking? How do they get this kind of behavior according to Rest if it's not going through conventional ethics? What would Dag Hammarskjöld have to offer us in this context? What would Dag Hammarskjöld say? Did he talk about his life as a Christian? Did he talk about his life as a socialist? Did he talk about his life as a Swedish bureaucrat? No. What did he talk about? No, but what did he talk about when he talked about how does he develop his core values? You take them from wherever you have them. Did anybody actually do that? Sit down and write down their core values and their red lines? Not yet? Okay. It's not an assignment, but think about it. What are your core values? What are the lines you refuse to cross? Take those and what do? You compare them with others in your environment. And of course, it's even more important if you're working internationally. And then you find your common denominators and you try to live up to them. And what's the tool that he recommends? Inner dialogue, right. Inner dialogue. Other options are solitudine, quiet time, or self-purification. So Rest does not actually prescribe how to reach post-conventional behavior. He's actually not that interested in how people become post-conventional. He's just testing whether they are or are not. Obviously, people will then take this and use it in training, try to train post-conventional thinking and behavior, but he's testing it empirically. Which people are post-conventional, which people are maintaining norms, and which people are self-interest. So the good news is that this theory is much more applicable to a context where there's culture of impunity. And obviously we know where Charles Malik got his values from. When you talk about Charles Malik's contribution to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, most people talk about his Catholic, Christian foundations. This is actually one of the criticisms of the Universal Declaration. If you're in China or in your Saudi Arabia, what would be the obvious argument against, or in Burma, Myanmar, they were especially good at this. Right. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is developed by Jews and Christians, and therefore does not apply to Burma, China, or Saudi Arabia. It's culturally biased. And that's probably true. That's a fact. Does it make it wrong? No, but it does make it rooted in one culture. It's the dominant culture today. And why is Western, Greco-Semitic, that's a term you can chew on, Greco-Semitic. Who are the Semites, by the way? Arabs, Hebrew, Jews, Arabs, Jews, and? No. Syriacs. Syriac, Hebrew, and Arab are the three most significant Semitic languages. If you look at Hebrew, you'll find a lot of words that are the same as Arabic. It's the same family. So Greco-Semitic means the culture of the Jews and the Greeks. Hellenistic, Greek, and Jewish Semitic. It's the culture of this region. And this is the dominant culture globally now. Why is this culture dominant? And don't say because the Jews rule the world, please. Don't do that to me. Okay. Why? Who has forced the Christian and Jewish, the Western Hellenistic, the Semitic cultures on the globe? Who forced it upon them? The British and the French. How? Colonialism. So the Burmese, the Saudis, and the Chinese have a point. The fact that this is not foreign to this region, obviously, but it is foreign to China or Burma or Saudi Arabia. They have a point, to an extent, that this is a colonial heritage, a colonial residue which could be overdone. Okay, anyway, however you explain how someone becomes post-conventional, the point is you do not have to live in a culture dominated by rule of law. Now, why do people tend to be post-conventional at a higher rate in societies where there is a culture of impunity than in societies where there isn't? This is a tough question. Statistically, and this is something that Rest found out when he studied Poland and Russia. In Poland and Russia, there's a higher level of culture of impunity than there is in Canada or Germany, because of the old communist traditions where basically there were two governments. So those of you who are not old enough to remember the Cold War, I guess I'm the only one who can remember that. During the Cold War, let me tell you about the Cold War, okay, which started in 1949, 50, and ended in 89 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, and 91 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. The communist countries had always had two parallel governments. They had the government, and they had the Communist Party. So the Ministry of Transportation was a government institution, but on all levels you also had a communist watching them, making sure that they do things right. So you had a parallel government, which led to a lot of corruption. So if you wanted to get something done, it was much easier to go through the party and to bribe somebody than to actually do it the correct way. This is why, for example, if you look at the victims of the flight, of the Malaysian Airlines flight, they were surveying them. The ones who believe the Malaysian government and those who don't. Almost everybody from China believes the rate of acceptance or credibility of the Malaysian government is 0. And the people from other parts of the world, it's much higher. And the people from the West, it's the highest. Why would people from the West believe the Malaysian government more than people, let's say, from Hong Kong or from Cambodia? And people who are from China would believe them 0. They don't believe their own government. In China, nobody believes the government. So they assume that all other governments are the same. Whereas somebody from the US, normally they think the government is doing their job, and if they don't do their job, we should do something about it, because there must be a mistake or one rotten apple. But the government itself is assumed to be based on rule of law. So the communist experience was very similar, if you will, to the Middle Eastern experience. We don't expect the government to do its job. Basically, it's just serving its friends or even just itself. We don't go to a ministry and fill out a form and expect free access to information. Before you go to the government to do something, what do? You find out who's going to be dealing with your case, then you find out about that person, and we try to pull in a wasta somewhere, right? And then you go. You don't go empty-handed, right? Yeah, of course. Okay, so, thank you. So the experience is that the maintaining norms option is weak. Who in a culture of impunity would maintain norms? No one. Not even the people in power would do it. And the people who don't have power, they have two options. What is it? What are the two options for people who don't have power in a culture of impunity?
Personal interest and post-conventional.
Bravo. Personal interest? Okay. He wants a bribe? Here's a bribe. You want some more wasta? Let me see who I know. You just play along. Personal interest. Or post-conventional, or you leave, which is one of the main reasons why people go to LAU and AUB and USG is to get a foreign recognized degree so they can, I'm out of here, right? Which is very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, but I have a hard time telling my students when they say I'm going to leave after I graduate, I have a hard time telling them to stay. But actually, you should stay, right? Or go and come back. Okay, so what does this mean if you have two options, self-interest and post-conventional? What does this mean for our study?
Are not only more people are going to be able to choose post-conventional since they refuse the personal interest, they're going to choose only.
Right. So if you're an ethical person, and it's amazing, I do this all the time. I did it this morning. You're coming from, if you know the area, you're coming from Babda, Hazmiya, into Bush Hamoud. You're going up the ramp, and there's construction there now, right? So there's a big, and there's like an option of like forming 2 lines, or 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 on the side, and then fight it out, right? And how many people actually do that extra option? 10, 20, maximum 25%. Why do 75% just line up?
They choose.
Why do they do that? Are they afraid of scratching their car, or what's the wrong?
Yes.
Is it pure self-interest? Or is it maybe that actually 75% of the population believes that we should have a country that somehow respects rules? We all know what lining up means, right? So, why do people choose to be ethical? Because many people would argue that is the human condition. People like to be fair. Anywhere in the world, they like to be fair. So if you like to be fair, and you cannot choose the option of maintaining norms, which other option can't you choose?
You can't choose personal interest.
You can't choose personal interest because it's not an ethical choice. Thus, you're forced into post-conventional thinking. And what we're going to see in this study is that in both Poland and Russia, post-conventional thinking is higher. And my personal experience is, I mean, you might not believe me, but there are a lot of people in Lebanon who, for no other reason than that they are ethical themselves, choose to be post-conventional. They're not getting anything out of it. Okay. How does Kohlberg gather his data? He uses interviews. What kind of interviews? What kind of questions does he use? Primarily open-ended questions. The Heinz dilemma is based on open-ended questions. And which means it's a qualitative, open-ended interview format. Open-ended interview format. Rest does the exact opposite. Close-ended. Closed-ended. Survey and quantitative. Okay, for those of you who have taken a research methods class, what is the advantage of interviews with open-ended questions?
You can find out what are the real intentions of.
It's very, very rich. The information you get back is really deep. I can spend a lot of time talking to somebody. I gave you the example in the previous class of my favorite question when studying migration intentions, about the intention to leave or stay in Lebanon. Do you have 2 passports? If yes, is the second passport from a country in the West, meaning Europe, North America? If yes, what would have to happen in Lebanon for you to want to give up your foreign passport? And then you have 2 hours. to respond, and you can start thinking about this. Another one is when we were discussing return migration. A lot of you know that people come back to Lebanon, families come back when their first daughter reaches puberty, especially if they're living in North America or South America. Less in West Africa, and even less in the Gulf because of the social control. But in North America and South America and Australia, you can't keep control of your daughters once they reach a certain age. And so you bring them back to Lebanon. So we were doing training in oral history, and so the question was, for those of you who lived abroad when you were a kid or know people, when you came back to Lebanon, did you have any unfinished business? Was there anything you wish you had done before you came back that you couldn't do? People are smiling. You know how long people can answer that question? Forever, right? And people say, oh, I probably just made some people have nightmares tonight. Okay, so, so these kind of qualitative questions are very rich. We get a lot of information out of a person on a specific topic. What can't you do with those results? What can you not do?
Generalizing.
You cannot generalize, and why do you want to generalize?
Facilitate your work. To say that it applies to everyone.
What's called comparing. You can't compare results when you have very deep and rich qualitative results. That means that your study is very, reliability versus validity. Oh, you thought that you weren't going to have to talk about those kind of things in the political science class. What is the difference between validity and reliability when you're doing research? Does it mean the same thing? I thought that engineers and science students were like tough science people and they knew these kinds of terms. My political science students know this, right? No, they don't. They don't know it either. But valid means you get as much truth as you can out of a qualitative research. Gives you a lot of valid information. It's true about this person. When someone starts talking about the unfinished business back when they were in Montreal, they can go on forever. It's really rich and it's really true. They're not making it up. They probably hadn't thought of that for years. What we cannot do is compare. Reliability means that if I do a experiment or I can do it again and again and the results will be similar each time, which means I can take the results I got from people coming back from Montreal and the results from people coming back from the Gulf and coming back from South America and coming back from Australia, and I can compare them. That means the questions have to be close-ended and very simple. Otherwise, we can't compare. So, whereas Kohlberg is highly valid, REST is highly reliable. This is important because what REST wants to then do is compare Russia and Poland to Germany and Canada and get the differences. He wants to compare women and men. He wants to compare people who have high levels of education and low levels of education. And what we find out is that in some cases, education is irrelevant. You would assume if people have a lot of education that they are more ethical. Is that true, or are we just guessing? Not always. Why, by the way, consider this. This is a question I often put on the test. Why are people from Russia, Poland, and women more post-conventional than men or people from Western Europe? Why are women more post-conventional? Think of the rules. Why do girls get better grades, except for the engineers, of course? Why do girls get better grades? Even in engineering? Even in engineering? Oh my goodness, okay. That's the classical guy. They don't have anything else to do, right? Except study. They have the patience. No, why do girls get better grades? Girls, why do girls get better grades? They try harder. They work more. Why? You know, I haven't figured it out, but I found a correlation. I'm not establishing a causal relationship, but I found a correlation between hard work and success. I don't know how that works. It's really, really mind-boggling, but people who work hard tend to be more successful than people who don't. I can't explain it, but it seems to be true. It's not hard to explain? Okay, so why do girls get better grades? Because they work harder. So the question is not why they get better grades, why do they work harder? Why do women, as a rule, work harder than men? Okay, we can put it that way. They have something to prove. Women not only have to succeed, but they have to succeed against stereotypes. They are underestimated. First of all, the reason I don't hire women is because all they do is they get a job, 3 years later they get married, year after that they take off because they have kids. So just don't hire them in the first place. That is an assumption. We can talk about that issue, but the assumptions about women are often false, so women have to prove them wrong. What is a stereotype? Okay. Yeah. So, you have preconceived judgments, you have ideas, biases against groups, and you apply it to everybody. By the way, does anybody know the origin of the word stereotype? How does every fairy tale begin? And how does it end? So, in the good old days, before we had computers, printers actually had to put little lead letters. That's why it's called a press. And they put ink on it, and it went down on the paper and went, it pressed. And if you are writing a book about, let's say you're a publisher and you're publishing a book of books on fairy tales, would you write once upon a time, each time put the letters together? Or you might put them together and put them on the wall once upon a time. And all the phrases that are very common, you would keep preset. And those are called stereotypes. So the idea that we have preset ideas about people comes from the printing industry. So women have to disprove stereotypes. So what does that tell us about women's approach to maintaining norms?
They don't expect the norms to go in their favor.
Right. They don't expect the norms to be fair. They're not even-handed. The norms are, in this world, set up to benefit men. For example, this is my favorite example. Does anybody know what the glass ceiling is? Yes. Who? Yes, okay. An engineer, good. Okay, what's the glass ceiling?
They usually say the term for the women and the minority in a certain company. They can see the higher positions in management, but they can't.
Where did you learn that?
Better or
Pad 201?
no, principles of management.
Okay, good. You all know those maps, the demographic maps, where there's a black dot is 1,000 people. You take the map of Lebanon and you put black dots for every 1,000 people. It's going to be very black around Beirut. The whole way up to Junia, it's going to thin out a little bit to Jbeil, then it's going to thin out a lot into Batroun, and then it's going to thin out again in Byblos, blah, blah. Okay, if you take the dots and you plot them, you can do this very simply now with a statistical program. Everybody, even in Lebanon today, more or less, if they have any form of training, men and women equal when they enter the job market. Equal qualifications. Around halfway up the career, they're still more or less the same. But then, when you get to the top, it's almost only men. And all the women are stuck here in the middle, statistically. So what happens is they get to here, and they bounce off the invisible glass ceiling. Let me give you an example of how this works. There's no rules that make this work. But one of the most important things today is not fairness in hiring, but fairness in career advancement. And what's one of the most important things? This is important for all of you, no matter what career you have. What's one of the most important things to do to get up the career ladder, to move forward in your career? What do you have to do besides work hard and be loyal? Okay, another graphic term. We're very into the bathroom in this class. Okay, What do you have to, what do you have to do?
Prove yourself. Prove yourself.
But what else do you have to do?
Be a man.
Be a man, good. Act like a man. Okay. When you want to improve your skill set, what do you do besides practice a lot? You take training courses. Bravo. Often the employer will offer training courses. I'm going to give you the example that the guys like. It's a 10-day training course, all expenses paid, 10 straight days in Istanbul. All the guys love it, right? 10 days away from the little lady. Istanbul is a swinging city, right? And everything goes in Istanbul, right? Guys are all for it, right? The girls are going, I don't think so. Why are the women reluctant to sign up? Girls, why are the women reluctant to sign up? Because they have to water their flowers. No, why? They have to take care of their family, including their husband, who's probably going to say, no way. 10 days, no way, right? So let's take another option. Same company, but we have training modules, now not 10 straight days, but 2.5 days, broken down into once a month, half of Friday and Saturday, not Sunday, in Tripoli, Beirut, Saida, Sachle, and Srata. Spread it out, right? And we have free childcare with trained babysitters and children's animators. Guys go, what? What? What a waste of time. What do the girls think? Yellow, let's do it. So, this is how the glass ceiling works. As long as you have everything set up to serve the interests of men, the women are going to get stuck and they're not going to take the career advancement courses. These are formal settings. These are formal policies. Women experience these policies. You get a letter in the email, you have the intranet, the company intranet, you get another invitation to one of those 10-day training courses in Istanbul, and you go, there they go again. Another chance to move up the career ladder, and I can't do it. Does that make you more or less likely to support maintaining norms? Less likely. So it's different, but in a certain ways it's similar to the experience in Eastern Europe or the Middle East. Okay. Finally, actually I didn't want to put education. Education. Does education make you more or less ethical? I gave you the example that we of a survey we did. We did this. We could do this again, but sometimes we do things and then we get tired and do something else. We had it was called Values in Higher Education. We did it for a couple of years to look at the values. It was together with a research center called the CRVP. By the way, guys, do you know about the research centers at NDU? No. Okay. Which research centers do we have at NDU? We have Water, Energy, and Environmental Research Center, WORK. And that research center is supposed to be moving to the engineering faculty. Then we have the Center for Applied Research and Education. That research center has already moved to the, which faculty? Humanities faculty. Then we have the Lebanese Immigration Research Center. Political Science. And then we have the CRVP. That is the Council for Research. Are you guys writing this down? No? Okay, I'll go over it again. Council for Research in Values and Philosophy. That's the one most closely linked to this class. And with some students in this class, we did Dr. Edward Allen. He's the guy I always go to when I want to say something about religion, because he's very good Maronite. And before I say something and get in trouble, I say, Edward, I'm going to say this in class. Am I going to get in trouble? And he goes, no, go ahead and say it, right? So then I go, okay. Edward said it's okay. Okay, So, he's the director. Council for Research in Values and Philosophy. Work, Water, Energy, Environmental Research Center. CARE, Center for Applied Research in Education. LERC, Lebanese Immigration Research Center. What we found out, we took the DIT, the DIT, as a model, and we studied, this was about 4 years ago, so probably none of you were here or you just started, and we studied the approach to ethics that students, first we started with business, the biggest faculty. We didn't want to do humanities or political science because everyone would say, oh yeah, those guys are always into ethics and do-gooders, you know, let's try business. We did business first. Next semester we did engineering. And the results were almost identical. The longer they were here at NDU, the less ethical they were. Then we did something similar in both semesters. We set up a TV camera in the hall during the break and asked students the same questions but now live on camera. Like, if you got a stolen software package, would you take it? Would you give it to your friends? If the attendance sheet was passing through, would you sign for your friend? Blah, 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 blah. You know, there's typical examples. And the willingness to be unethical went up significantly year after year because everyone's doing it. So the good apple got in the bad barrel, and by the end of the, right, you know the story. Okay, good. So when we look at education, we can study this, and this is why I asked that question. Education is sort of the one environment where it goes both ways. Normally, you're taught to be ethical and taught to obey rules in your family. Rarely, when you go to church or to mosque, do they say, well, last week we said this is how it's going to do it, but I've changed my mind. This year, we have a new approach to whatever, right? This doesn't happen. This is called dogma, right? Dogma are rules that you can't question. Religion is dogmatic, at least in a neutral sense, a good thing because these are things you can rely on forever because they're from God. Families are also, normally families, at least they shouldn't do this, be favorites and this kind of thing or change the rules every week. But when you reach education, it can go both ways. So education is sending us what we call mixed signals. Does everybody understand that term, mixed signals? It means one time you're saying one thing, next time you're saying something else. So education in itself can be confusing. You can experience both. But education has a second quality. It doesn't teach us normally about post-conventional ethics. It teaches us to do things effectively, efficiently. And how do you improve your efficiency? Any students who are studied courses on efficiency? In a business setting, in an organizational setting, how do you get more productivity out of your company or your organization? Okay, the skill set of the workers and the work organization. It doesn't help just to buy a bunch of new computers. You have to change your work organization. And the second thing is technology. Education is similar. It provides you with skills, with technology, but what you do with it normally is not something that the educational setting will provide you with. So, my favorite example of someone who was highly educated was a guy by the name of Dr. Joseph Goebbels. Does anybody know who that was? That was the propaganda minister of Adolf Hitler, of the Third Reich. And Joseph Goebbels was a Nazi, obviously, so he didn't really like Jews. But he was the first person to systematically use psychoanalysis in his propaganda. What does that mean? What does psychoanalysis teach us? How it teaches us about the value of the subconscious as opposed to the conscious. And who developed psychoanalysis? Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud, like Albert Einstein and Karl Marx, was a Jew. Uh-oh. So we can't use that, right? We can't use psychoanalysis as a good Nazi because it's Jewish. Does he care? No. Today, anybody who takes a course in marketing or leadership in any way, shape, or form knows that leadership is not about what I say, but is about how I say it and how I act. You take your cues from people's behavior, not from... So, Goebbels proves that education doesn't really make you good because he used education in a highly efficient manner. Today, a lot of what we know, not only in the area of psychoanalysis or in marketing, but in many other areas, we got because of the very creative, quote-unquote, approaches of the Nazi Third Reich. Okay, so education. Normally, the results in education are that education makes people more ethical. But what Rest found using his approach is that you find many examples of it making people worse. And here we're going to see with Zimbardo how that works as well.